Welcome back to Let's Talk. At this version of Let's Talk, we're going to be discussing the Rondout Neighborhood Center being renamed to the official, listen to this, the official Al Brown Community Center. So let's take a look at one of the wires that's out there. Here's the Kingston Wire. Righting a historic wrong. For those of you who don't know, two mayors plotted to keep black leader Albert Brown's name off of the Rondout Community Center. Kingston. This is written by Jesse J. Smith from the Kingston Wire. In April 1968, as the Vietnam War raged and Simon and Garfunkel's soundtrack, The Graduate, topped the charts, the Kingston Common Council voted unanimously to name a new community center in the city's Rondout neighborhood for pioneering community organizer and civil rights activist Albert Brown. Now you got to realize this is in the 60s. Civil rights activists against what? Urban renewal was one of them. Housing was a lot of things. Next month, the Kingston Common Council will have an opportunity to finish the job and see Brown's name finally attached to what is now the Rondout Neighborhood Center. The story behind the 57-year delay is one laid out in faded newsprint by Brown's nephew, Carl Brown, that's me, in a presentation to the city's Parks and Recreation Commission that alleges the honor was held up and eventually tossed out through the efforts of two former Kingston mayors and an oversight or outright falsehood about rules around naming federal funded buildings. They were also determined not to name it for him, and they made up a lie, said Carl Brown, 70 years old, who said that he and his uncle were raised as brothers. They lied and they got away with it. Albert Brown died in a car crash in East Opus in October 1967 at the age of 25 years old. 25. And you're holding back a name of a building on a 25-year-old to their mother and father who served the city. But during that time, he made more contributions to the community than most people do in a lifetime. He was one of the only black managers at IBM. As a part-time police officer, he was the first generation of black Kingston cops and was recognized as Patrolman of the Year for thwarting an armed robbery. He was the founder of the city's Kingston Police Athletic Boxing League and Biddy League basketball programs. In summer of 1967, as rioting exploded in the cities across the country, including disturbances in Newburgh and Poughkeepsie, Kingston Wire columnist Hugh Reynolds, then a young reporter for the Daily Freedom, recalls accompanying Brown as he walked through the neighborhood trying to diffuse tensions. There were groups of people in the street that were just very angry, and Al would go up and speak to them calmly and just kind of talk them down, Reynolds said. Brown also served as the president of Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty, as outreach director for Kingston's first Head Start program. As head of the local chapter of Congress of Racial Equality, Brown exposed housing and discrimination and redlining in Kingston. And as the city began drawing up plans to demolish large swaths of his Rondout neighborhood and displace some 4,000 of its residents, Brown stood as a powerful voice against urban renewal, something we should have more in the movie The Lost Rondout, but was taken out All those buildings that were torn down were owned by either immigrants or black people, said Carl Brown, who said his uncle wanted to see these funds redirected to rehabbing buildings in a vibrant, bustling, and diverse neighborhood that the Rondout was, that the downtown area was of Kingston. Al Brown saw that. He spoke out against it. And he saw it. He was a man ahead of his time. The story of the naming controversy in 1968, after the city received $193,000 in grant money through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to build a new community center in the Rondout neighborhood. In April of that year, Kingston, then 13-member Common Council, voted unanimously to name the new facility in Brown's honor after he died. Then Joe Epstein is the person who brought it there. Then Mayor Ray Garrigan promptly vetoed the resolution. According to reports in the Daily Freeman from the time, Garrigan then began lobbying aldermen not to override the veto and threatening anyone who votes for that will never get elected in the city of Kingston again. It's in the papers, black and white. We didn't say that, he said that. The effort failed and the council voted 11-2 to reinstate the name. At the time, Garrigan gave shifting explanations for his opposition to naming the new neighborhood center for Brown. In the Daily Freeman, he's quoted as saying aldermen supported the naming for political reasons. Reynolds, who reported on the naming controversy, recalls that Garrigan told him he opposed the name because city schools had traditionally been identified by numbers, not named for individuals. What an excuse. Pathetic. Garrigan expressed his displeasure to me about naming the new center for Brown. I don't recall if I wrote about it at the time or if it was one of those off-the-record things, Reynolds said. His rationale was that we don't name schools after people, which was patently false. It used to be all the schools had numbers instead of names, but by that point, they were building schools all over town named for people. Carl Brown said that he believes racism was at least partially behind Garrigan's opposition. What would you think? What would you think when you listen to this? What else could it be? It had only been 3 years since another core leader, Leonard Van Dyke, had been elected to the city's first black alderman, and the idea of naming a municipal building for an outspoken black civil rights activist likely offended many Kingstonians' sensibilities. I don't know for sure if it was racism, said Brown. But this was a time when black people were getting killed for speaking out, not getting buildings named after them. Garrigan himself denied a racial motive for his opposition in the Freeman, that his decision to veto the council's naming effort has nothing to do with Al Brown, white people, or black people. Garrigan's opposition was immediately controversial. The day after the veto, a picket line formed outside the City Hall office with protesters chanting, "Al Brown Memorial Now." This is what the people voted. It's not about what Garrigan wanted, it's what the people wanted. The Common Council represents the people. The mayor executes what the common council and the people want. Thank you. So, the veto was overridden. The naming of the center seemed to be a done deal. But in 1969, as final plans were being drawn up, the construction of the center, the following year, the new mayor, Frank Koenig, came up with a new line of attack. Addressing a community meeting with Koenig, held up a HUD manual and claimed that agency rules forbid naming a building built with federal money after a person. Carl Brown said that claim was a lie. And it was. Come on. HUD was working directly with the city of Kingston. They were there at the city Kingston offices during urban renewal. The Lost Rondout, I don't know if you know that part of history, but they were there. If there was any problem with naming a building, they would have said it a long time ago. They never interceded. Never. Not once. People accepted it because at the time, people believed what their elected officials told them, said Brown. And there was no Google back then. Reynolds said that Kingston's officials playing fast and loose with HUD regulations was common at the time when millions of dollars of federal funding through the agency were flowing into Kingston's urban renewal plans. They were always making stuff up about city relationship with HUD, Reynolds said. The council wanted to know how much the director of the HUD programs in Kingston was getting paid, because he didn't seem to be doing much. And he told them that he couldn't reveal his salary because of HUD rules. That was BS. This isn't from us, this is from Hugh Reynolds. Carl Brown said he grew up knowing about the naming controversy, in part because members of his family believed Albert Brown's death was not an accident and feared retaliation. Brown, who returned to Kingston in 2013 after a career in IT with United Airlines, said he first became aware of the issue in 2020 when he attended a ceremony naming a stretch of the Kingston Rail Trails after an Army Staff Sergeant, Charles Johnson, who my family knew also, a Rondout native killed in the action in Vietnam in 1967. Pat Ryan was basically at this award ceremony in Congress. But while addressing the crowd, the then Assemblyman Kevin Cahill pointed out Carl Brown and urged him to look into the issue. He called me out by name, he calls Brown. He said, "Carl, you need to look into the history of the Rondout Neighborhood Center, seriously." For help, Brown turned to Kingston City historian and acting Ulster County clerk, Taylor Brook, who showed him how to access the archives for the Daily Freeman maintained by the county. Actually, he just gave me the links to clear that up right there. I didn't do the research. Taylor Brook did the research, gave me the links, I looked them up. Brown said the searchable archive served as an invaluable asset as he began piecing together the story. As you realize, this information was then digitized. So, looking at information on a microfilm, you have to know the exact day, the month, the week, and the year of everything that you're looking for. So you have to go through years of information. You just can't select a name and say, let me search for Al Brown. With the digitized information, you could do that. So with this happening, saved me years of research just to prove something I knew in my heart that had happened. I just needed the backup documentation in back of me to succinctly prove it, as you would do in a court of law. So, if it wasn't for the help, none of this would happen, said Brown, especially from Taylor Brown. Brown's research culminated in a presentation using old news clippings to make the case that the Rondout Center was in fact named for Albert Brown and should be recognized as such by the city. Brown said he presented his findings to Mayor Steve Noble, who was receptive to his idea and advised him to take the matter before the city's Parks and Recreation Commission, which vets requests to naming public buildings and other facilities. The commission signed off on the renaming on July 23rd. The Kingston Common Council, Parks, Public Safety, and General Government Committee will take up the issue on this July 23rd. This is when we get a chance to either get a yay or nay, guys. Let's keep our fingers crossed. If the committee approves the measure, the full council will vote on the renaming in August. The name change, Brown said, would right a long-standing injustice. But Brown added that a truly just resolution would require changing the names of the two vestiges of the urban renewal era, Garrigan Drive, and the adjacent stretch 9W named Koenig Boulevard. Why do we have that recognition for knowingly not doing and executing what the people wanted for that community center? Those men lied to keep Al Brown from getting the recognition that he deserved. And now they have streets named for them, said Brown. I find it disgusting. And it's nobody else's fault on doing this. But the reason why, I just want to let you know why I find it disgusting. You have a 24-year-old kid that loses his life, that gave his life since 19 to Kingston with all of the programs that he was trying to create for the kids in the underserved communities. Okay? You can't name a building after him, but you go out of your way to make up a lie about it. That I find disgusting. If anything, name the building to honor the mother and father and to honor what he's given to this town. Because if it wasn't for him, the Powell League wouldn't exist, the Biddy League wouldn't exist. Maybe later on it would have, but it wouldn't have, not the way it was. It got these kids out of harm's way from downtown into a nice area to play basketball where they couldn't play downtown. They got them summer job programs, cleaning up the parks, putting money in their pocket, making them have a little bit of pep in their step, staying out of trouble. Hey, can't make this stuff up. And then you have a WBC welterweight, junior welterweight coming out of that Powell League, Billy Costello Jr. Come on. It's the least they could do. But then, the next day, considered another article. Then Hugh Reynolds, as you see, had written an article a couple hours ago, and he knew Albert, but he was a journalist back then, and everything I said was quoted from him. So here's what he had to say. It's taken more than 2 generations, but it appears justice will finally be served for the young Kingston police officer killed in an off-duty single-car accident in West Park in 1969. Albert Brown was nobody's Barney Fife. One of the city's few black police officers on the force for only a few years, Brown spent his off-duty time promoting civil rights, housing equity, and fair play. Active in a number of organizations, Brown, 25, was a leader in an NAACP and founder of the KPD's Police Athletic League, and more. As a young reporter, with only about 2 years behind us, our paths crossed. Al was the kind of straight-talking, reliable source I valued. When riots broke out during the long, hot summer of 1967, the violence spread upriver like an incoming tide. The first was Harlem, then Yonkers, then Newburgh. It seemed to ebb at Poughkeepsie, but locals were deeply worried that something might break out here. Rumors and busloads of agitators headed for Kingston had everyone on edge that night. The Daily Freeman was located in the 3-story building at the foot of Broadway, now the site of Mariners Harbor. Across the street was a number of black bars. An editor asked me if I knew Al Brown, who had been spotted going into one of those places shortly after sunset. "Why don't you walk with him tonight?" he said. "It's not a suggestion." I found Brown talking in a small group of young black men at the bar. He spotted me coming through the door and came over. I asked him if I could walk with him. "Okay," he said. "But keep your mouth shut," he said. Brown would approach a group of young men, some of them obviously agitated, and talk to them in that calming voice of his. It was like for most of the night into the early morning hours. Kingston was quiet that night. I like to think Al Brown had something to do with that. In fact, I'm sure he did. A year later, Brown was killed when his car smacked into the wall of north of the Maris Brothers on Route 9W North. The accident occurred in the early morning hours. Details were on state police blotters when reporters checked later that morning. The ill-starred movement to name recently opened Rondout Neighborhood Center for Al Brown began almost immediately. Aldermen-sponsored resolutions which were quickly passed through committees. And I'd like to say the first alderman that started this was Joe Epstein from the Rondout in that ward, who had a store on Broadway. Mayor Ray Garrigan serving out his last few months of his 4-year term, was against naming the building after Brown or anybody. Garrigan claimed that Kingston did not name its public buildings after individuals. The next mayor, Frank Koenig, claimed it was not allowed by HUD, which footed the bill for urban renewal. As investigative reporter Jesse Smith detailed in an excellent retelling of the story of the Kingston Wire last week, neither case was true. That I just read to you last week, Jesse's Wire. The Kingston Common Council voted 13-0 to name the building after Al Brown. Garrigan vetoed the legislation threatening political reprisals against anyone who opposed him. A defiant council overrode the veto by 11-2. So he did sway 2 of them. But it wasn't enough. And there it died. Now, Members of Al Brown's family have convinced this Common Council that they should right the unjust and name that building after Albert Brown. Word from the council is that there are enough votes to do that, just that, perhaps as early as next month. Let's keep our fingers crossed. It's about time. I'll address, and this is Hugh Reynolds, I'll address calls in some quarters to remove the names of Garrigan and Koenig from streets, Garrigan Drive and highways, Koenig Boulevard, Route 9W North at Lawrence Bridge to Route 32 in the town of Ulster in a subsequent column. So, well, there you have it. All in a nutshell, we hope the Kingston City Common Council follows through with this. But as we go forward, there's a lot of things that we have to look forward to in that building. For one thing, it was put up wrong. We need to have that building. It needs to have the programs that Al Brown wanted. We need a gym in there where people can come and sit down and watch their kids play basketball, a bigger gym. We need a theater down there also, so that we can have performances, things of that nature that we had in the center. The old center was small, but we had the stage. We also need some senior things for the seniors to do. And a weight room, not just for the cops, but also for the community. Upstairs. Downstairs, theater, senior room, a Head Start, or some type of reading program, because that's what's Albert's dream. So, we're not done. And I think it's time now. Our Rondout Historic Preservation Foundation, maybe we need to think about this name. Should it be the Al Brown Foundation? And we use funds to put in programs and things for kids in underserved areas so that we can serve them better. So we can stop saying they're underserved. And for anyone in Kingston. So we have things for people to do, outlets, activities. Anyway, signing off for Let's Talk. We're out.